I'm Karl Deeter, and this is Ronan Lyons of Daft, and we're doing our first video blog today on the 24th of August. Today we're going to be talking about a diverse set of topics, from property tax to the general economy. So I suppose we'll kick off. Ronan, the subject of property tax, obviously a stickler in Irish society. Nobody wants it. The last time someone thought about bringing it in, to a degree, it almost turned the government. What do you think is going to happen this time around?
Well, I have a sneaking suspicion that probably isn't going to be the kind of property tax we need. I just don't think the political appetite is there for bringing in what would be essentially a far more controversial tax, even if it only raised the same amount of every household as an increase in income tax did. I think people just have a notion in their heads. The political sense in Ireland is generally that a house is their house, and they don't necessarily mind paying stamp duty. They don't particularly like it. They regard it as less of an invasion in their privacy as they would an annual property tax like most of the developed countries in the world already have. The irony is a property tax done in a certain way and replacing stamp duty would actually be the biggest kick up the backside for the Irish property market over the next 3 years. It could actually stimulate a huge number of transactions, bring great business for estate agents. There's a whole range of potential benefits. But people don't like the idea of, for example, a pensioner having to pay a certain amount every year. And that's understandable. It's a decision society has to make. There's some of my thoughts. I don't know, what are your thoughts on property tax?
Well, I'm a believer in property tax, but I'm also a believer in less income tax. I think taxing labour is somewhat of a mistake. There's a few points where I feel tax is most effective, and it's at points of distribution in some cases, and in others it's for holding certain assets or wealth vehicles. It makes sense to me. So if you own a property, I think it will make sense that should be taxed. The tax should pay for things like your water that goes to that house, the roads in that area, and it should probably really go to a local council. On other issues, I feel that tax should always go after harmful activities, and that's why I'd be a believer in things like congestion charges and petrol tax. But equally, I think it's important to get rid of less efficient taxation. So if you are going to have petrol charges and congestion charges, you should get rid of VRT. You should get rid of flat road tax. If you and me both bought the same car, it was a 2-litre car, we pay the same tax every year. Well, I might drive 50,000 miles and you drive 5,000. So really do it on what a car consumes by creating carbon. And you get into a host of beneficial ways of taxing things. Equally with property, if you were to tax it appropriately and less income tax, which is stupid because taxing labour you can never predict where it's going. At least if you're taxing property, there's some form of flow to it that you can count on every year. But if you were to tax a property, it would mean that we predict what the future tax take is. It would mean that the people who hold valuable assets are paying, and an idea of fairness is always that those who can afford to pay should pay. It would mean people couldn't afford to land bank and see property prices driven up. It would mean that it doesn't make economic sense to keep it there like site for years, hoping for planning permission. And it has all these benefits. But I don't think people have the appetite for it, because you couldn't really substitute out income tax and put this in. You'd have to have a few years where literally you're just taxing the hell out of people. That would just end in trouble.
Yeah, I think I probably 90% agree with what you said there. In terms of, if you look at this, in the simple maths of it, if you were to tax even 0.5% of the property's value per year and spread it into monthly payments, or deduct that source from their wages or whatever it might be, that kind of system would bring in probably 1.5 billion, maybe 2 billion if we're being generous. What stamp duty and capital gains tax brought in, if you were replacing those, in the good days they brought in 8 billion. So we have a hole there that was very much a one-off boost to tax revenues. So we do need to think in terms of cutting public expenditure where it can be cut and striking the right balance with taxes. I've two other comments. First, I I 100% agree with the idea of taxing road usage better, taxing water usage better. If you look at IBM's Smarter Planet initiative, some of the things in that are really exciting. In Singapore, the price you're going to pay on a journey 2 or 3 or 5 years down the line is going to be based not just on how much petrol you use, and not just on the efficiency of your car, but on whether there was public sector or public transport alternatives, what the congestion levels were at the time, and the social cost you bring. We've got to allocate these resources. They're not infinite. Roads are not infinite. Water is not infinite. We've got ourselves into a way of thinking in Ireland where we view them as free, but they're not free. Even if we don't pay any euros for them, we end up paying time for them or suffering water outages.
Well, I'd argue with you, Ronan, that you actually do pay for them. We just don't see the bill as such, because when they're determining what our tax is, they say, we need to get more money in order to afford this.
Exactly.
This is part of the pie. But
people don't pay on a usage basis.
You don't get a bill for it in the traditional sense.
One thing I'd say is, what about if we're talking about, and this was the Irish strategy over the last 20 years anyway, it was to tax factors of production like labour and capital, to tax what people work and what money they have stored away in Ireland, tax that lightly, and we'll get our tax revenues through indirect sources, through tax consumption and things like that. I guess the issue there is that consumption taxes are inherently regressive, or if not regressive, they're certainly not progressive, because they're going to tax poorer households more. So I think there's a trade-off we have to achieve between saying we don't want to tax income and realising that the corollary is we're going to tax consumption, even if it's not consumption of cigarettes